Okay. Oh, good morning. If you can get seated, that would be great because I want to take a lot of questions. So is this not good? Is that clicking? I don't want to, is that okay? Okay, just so there's no static. My name's Wendi Dwyer. I'm really new here. I just moved to the neighborhood in August and immediately met my neighbor Nola, who recommended I walk over to this church, and I'm so glad she did. So it's really nice to be here. Um, and is this staticky? Is this hurting anybody's ears? Okay. I don't want anyone to be uncomfortable while I'm speaking. If I hold it like this? Okay. Okay. Um, Uh, and I'll just give a little rough background. I was born and raised in Madison. I started working with refugees in high school. I was asked by a teacher to help tutor two young women who had just come as refugees from Laos. And so I was very fortunate to learn about their lives and their experience at West High School at the same time as I was living a really easy, lovely life, playing tennis and having great meals at home and living with my family. They were separated from their family, and they had told me their story. It was horrific. I couldn't really imagine being 16 years old and being through everything that they had been through. So we became close. They could barely speak any English, of course, and were learning how to read. And so I got the opportunity to learn how to do ESL and then merging literacy lessons that were left for us in the foreign language library in a folder. And that led to my lifelong passion for working with refugees and then also empowering people with literacy skills. And Cam and Ping went on to then eventually, they worked at a Chinese restaurant and eventually owned a Chinese restaurant. Now they're both, I believe, retired. Um, but I have way too much to tell you, and I want to get you onto South Sudan. So I'll try to think of how to speed this up. I have four kids. While I was raising my kids, we welcomed refugees into our home, and the more well, I'll get you caught up to why Northeast Africa. Um, I was a teacher, an art teacher, and I started doing public art with friends who are newly arrived refugees to help refugee communities get to know each other. So doing mural projects or a big art day. And then that way, people in the community would want to join in and have their kids be a part of the art project. And so maybe the newly arrived families were sort of providing a way to interact with the other kids in mostly low income housing outside of Chicago. So in doing that, I did a project that caught the attention of Kenya Children's Fund, which is a Christian organization that provides education in Kinyago Dandora, which is one of the 12 dumps around Nairobi, Kenya. And the Kenyan school education, the Ministry of Education is pretty kick-ass. I mean, they're awesome. They really have a high standard, but they do not provide education in the dump areas because they think they don't want people to live there. So those people are considered squatters. So in the Ministry of Education's thinking that if they provide schools and services, more people will live in the garbage dumps, which are really dangerous. So, but generations and generations and generations of people grow up in Kinyago Dandora. So Kenya Children's Fund builds schools there. And so the executive director of Kenya Children's Fund saw a project I did building community with refugee communities and asked if I would come and do that in Kinyago and Dandora. And that became a big part of what I did for years. I would go and work with the teachers in Kinyago Dandora and also with donors and supporters who would want to come and see the school, helping them to not see it through the eyes of their lives, comparing, saying, oh, these poor children living in garbage. No, these are pretty rich lives with pretty powerful, amazing people with very deep relationships that happen to live in a garbage dump. And so through doing that, I got back to the United States after one of those trips, got a call from a social worker who said, we went to the airport to pick up one family from South Sudan, refugee family from South Sudan, and two families got off the plane. Both families have no skills for survival in Chicago. They arrived, the little boys had men's shoes, big black leather shoes, 4 and 6 years old, skinny little legs, no socks, walking through the airport like this, because when they got to the plane to come over, they didn't have shoes. So a worker, refugee worker over there had to grab whatever shoes there were and put them on the little boy's feet so that they could get on a plane. The mother of that particular family, Lucy, was in one single piece of fabric, which is really common in a lot of parts of South Sudan where people only own one piece of fabric. And so no undergarments, and it was pretty cold. So she asked, is it possible for me to bring that family to your house? We really don't have anywhere to bring this family. So they did. Fortunately, I was married at the time. I was married for a long time, but I was married for the at the time, and my husband was on a golf outing, and so he came home, and we had a family living in our house. But the great thing was the family was so lovable, and the little boys, I kept showing a picture and saying, Tim, 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 showing. So when he got out of the car from the golf outing, the two cutest little boys in the world, and our boys are adorable too, came running down the driveway yelling, Tim. So it's really hard to say no. But so that family was the first of the families that lived with us being resettled from South Sudan. So we did that over and over again the first 2 weeks in the United States. So we'd be teaching people about traffic and electricity, undergarments, toilets, all these things. And so it became a big part of my kids' growing up in their lives. Through that, some lost boys from South Sudan were resettled in the Chicago area. And one of them, named Archangelo, he asked very early on, may I be a part of your family? And we accepted it very seriously and said yes, and he's a big part of our family. And then he started bringing friends over and explaining that when they were in the Kakuma refugee camp, which we'll get to that in a little bit, they were very young and they started daydreaming about building schools. So this group of little boys who had never been able to go to school, had walked thousands of miles without any parents to survive to get to Ethiopia, and then were growing up in a refugee camp, their hobby was daydreaming about building a school. And so he brought over these young men who are now in their mid 20s. And I just started asking them, why do you want to do this? How would you do this? What do you need to do this? And just making lists. I was a teacher. That's what we do. So kind of creating a lesson plan with their help. What do you want to do? Why do you want to do it? Where do you want to do it? And it took us 6 months to raise the money because I'm also fundraising. That's my job. I'm a development professional. Took us 6 months to raise the money. It was the quickest fundraising I've ever done because they were so charming. They had answered all the questions of why you would want to do this and the importance of it. And then they had one of the most interesting stories in Chicago at that time. So I simply sent out a flyer to all the social studies teachers, high school social studies teachers in the Chicago area and said, with their story, and saying, we will come speak at any school for $3,000. So that's the normal assembly fee in the city of Chicago. That's not a lot of money. So I just sent it out. We were booked. I mean, we couldn't even take any more requests. And then with that money, we built a school. So that was the beginning of, it was called Lost Boys Rebuilding South Sudan. And that was the first NGO that I started in cooperation with South Sudanese refugees. We built that school And when that school was being built, I always said, I'll help you guys, but I'm never going to South Sudan because my Kenyan friends will never go to South Sudan. That's a pretty good indicator that South Sudan's pretty tough when other people who live very close to you will not go into your country. So I said, I'll help you, but I'm never going to South Sudan. It's really, really dangerous. There's one doctor for 300,000 people. That's today. At this time, it was 205. 2005, there was less doctors, okay? And there was no agreed upon laws. So, I mean, it was not a very safe place to be. You could be in one part of the country and commit what was considered a crime, and your sentence could be death. You could be in another part of the country, and your sentence would be 10 cows. So it's not a place you want to spend a lot of time. So I said, I'll never go into the country. But then our school was getting built. I was really curious. I wanted to see what it looked like. And I had the opportunity to hop on a humanitarian flight out of Nairobi and get pretty close to where our project was. And I don't know why I did it. I did it. I just went with a couple of the Lost Boys, hopped on, went to see the school. And when we got there, the building was almost complete, but none of the metal shutters or the door, security door, or anything like that. And when I say security door, it's just almost like a cattle door. It's just so you could lock up the school at night. We got there, and this empty, almost looked like a park pavilion, was filled with women. And the well we had put in for the school, the hand well, had yellow jerry cans just going for as long as you can imagine. And so we pull up in the Jeep, and out of this park pavilion, it looked like bees coming out of a hornet's nest. All the women came running out like they were doing something wrong. And we got there, and I asked William Mao, who became the now heads up literacy at the well, a lost boy who had lived with us. I asked him to translate to the women, stay out of the sun, go back in the building, stay out of the sun, because it was obvious they were just taking turns getting their water and staying out of the sun. So he got them all back in the building, and then he translated for me, and I asked them what they knew about the school, what they thought about this idea, and they all loved it. And then I asked who here can read, because we knew we were going to need some literate people to volunteer or help teach, or we'd pay people for the school. And not one woman in that, out of this whole huge group of women who would all be living in the area where the school is, could read. And then I asked, would you like to be able to read? And they all were, yes, we want to read. And then he translated that they had said, oh, there is a program in a wheel, which is pretty far from where we were, that is someday a week at some time, and we don't. So it was. So here, this is getting us to USAID right now. It was a USAID funded project, which I love USAID. This is going to sound negative, but it's just how things get developed. It was a USAID project, and they had not taken into account that they were dealing with a completely illiterate community. So they were using times and dates. That does not work in a place where people have no concept of what day. If you're not literate, you don't say Tuesday at 2 o'clock. That means nothing to nobody. So I started to quickly take notes and think, how could I contact them and tell them, these women want to learn how to read, but you've maybe started at step 3 and they're at step, 1A. And so then, long story short, I started asking while I was there, what time would you have to learn? When would be a good time? So I could go back to USAID and tell them. Well, it ended up us just developing our own project, which was simply having teachers available at well sites that were doing very simple group literacy lessons, almost like you would do camp lessons, like summer camp. So a lot of songs that had to do with it, a lot of letter making in the sand, really easy, fun, something that you would probably want to be a part of while you're waiting instead of sitting waiting to get your jerry can filled. You would probably want to participate in it. So it was just a hypothesis at the time, like we think this would work. And then started recruiting people who could learn simple how to teach literacy, and then paying them and then having them stationed at wells. And then we thought we'd see which ones worked and which ones didn't. Turned out all the wells went like wildfire. We had so many more people walking farther to a well that had literacy lessons than just going to get water, which was already really necessary to walk to get water. Um, so that was the beginning of what's called literacy at the well. And USAID, this is a really cool part of our interaction with USAID. At the time, they couldn't fund our project, but they were collecting a lot of data about our project, and they used our project as proof that when you raise the literacy rate, you lower the incidence of trafficking. So our project, wherever we started raising, because at the time, the South Sudanese women were the most trafficked women in the world. It was after the genocide. 3 million men were gone. So you have big communities with very few men, with people who are illiterate, who don't speak what's called an official language. And an official language is usually a border language. So that might be Arabic, French, or English when you're in Europe. And so you had women who were speaking tribal languages with no literacy. So really horrible people know that that's your most vulnerable people in the world, and especially when you have very few men in a community. So where we were raising the literacy rates, we were also introducing English. And the reason and I'll go into that, but the reason we were introducing English is because South Sudan was quickly becoming independent. They would be independent in 5 years from the time we started our project, and they had chose English as their new official language. So if you can imagine, most people didn't even speak the old official language, which was Arabic. But South Sudan was now aligning with the African Union instead of the Arab League of Nations. Before that, Sudan to the north was very much aligned with the Arab League of Nations, and they were in charge of all of Sudan at that point. And so the official language of all of Sudan at that point was Arabic. Then there's so much history. I don't even know where. I just want to get you to more to USAID, but I'll try to get you caught up. But South Sudan was becoming independent after the genocide that was carried out by Sudan to the north, using the Darfurians to carry out the genocide. The genocide is thought to be religious. It's not religious. The genocide was carried out because oil was found in South Sudan, and South Sudan was considered useless. The people were called insects and infidels, and the land was considered useless. So it's kind of like what we're doing right now, using words that will lead us to really horrible actions. So don't let anyone use terrible words. But they called the South Sudanese insects and infidels, and the land was considered useless. The people in the land were considered useless. So the Sudanese to the north, Omar al-Bashir, and that cabinet ignored South Sudan. There was no development, no schools, no doctors, no roads, absolutely no roads, no water, no electricity. When you went over the border and went north by Khartoum, you had hospitals, you had universities, you had not high rises, but like 6-story buildings, roads. It looks like a totally different world. And and it worked because the South Sudanese were like, we don't care. We're agrarian. We've got our cows. We've got our tribes. We have our languages. We love our lives. We're totally fine down here. They did not ask for anything from Sudan or the world. But when oil was found under their feet, all of a sudden they no longer were allowed to exist. So that's when the genocide happened, and the Darfurians were used. The Darfurians were being treated terribly until they were needed to carry out a genocide, at which point they were given AK-47s and horses and told to clear the land. And because those are infidels and they don't deserve to live. So it was that people were using religion to then incite people who didn't know better to then kill everyone. So 3 million men were killed. By the time I got involved, I was dealing with refugees who'd already been given status to leave the the country and resettle in the United States. And then that was during the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, which was 5 years of peace that was held by the United States, the EU, other partners, Arab League, and no, African Union, help create this 5 years that they would be able to create the systems they needed to become independent. And so I just thought, and I have a very strong relationship with God and I listen all the time. And if something makes sense and seems like a very unique invitation to me, I don't say no. I don't think, oh, that could be somebody else or why me? I think, well, that's weird. Okay, that's how the family got to our house. That's how the Lost Boys got into our house. And this is how the school got built. And now we knew that these women were really vulnerable. So I didn't stop and think, oh, there's got to be people much more capable than me. I thought I can go get those people. And that's what I did. So I became a huge witness for our learners. And God kept opening up opportunities. I spoke at the UN. And when I got that opportunity, I thought I'll show you some videos. We'll show a video in a second, so you don't have to hear my voice anymore. Oh, but my voice is on the video. Just warning you. Okay, you're not going to get that much of a break. But when I went to the UN, I could have gotten up there and done statistics and said blah blah blah. This is why we need this and this and this. I just interviewed all my learners, and I just asked them and said, what's different because you can read? Because I'm going to go talk to people who might be able to bring back help. What do you want them to know? And I got great answers, but this is what I said at the UN. One of our learners said, oh, excuse me, more people are alive because I can read. And I said, well, tell me more. What does that mean? I mean, that sounds great. I love that. And she said, when I couldn't read, my son, he was dying. He was 7 years old and he was very big and he was dying. So she carried him and she had to walk 3 miles to get into a very long line to get to see what she called a doctor, which probably wasn't a doctor. It was probably, some type of clinician. But anyway, so she gets to the front of the line. Her son is huge. It's 105 in South Sudan. There's no electricity, so it's pretty hard. And you're walking. So she gets to the front of the line, and he says, "Do blah blah blah, but whatever you do, don't blah blah blah, or he will surely die." And this is what she said, just like that, blah, blah, blah. So she walks home the 3 miles with her dying child, and she gets home and she said, I could not remember the do or the don't. And so I did nothing. And then by the grace of God, he lived. And I said, oh my gosh, that's every mother. Like if I couldn't write down the prescription when your child's really sick or what you're supposed to do, you can't hardly remember what a doctor's saying when you're getting a diagnosis. It's just so stressful, right? And if I couldn't write down the do or the don't, I would get home and not know the do or the don't. And I would just still remember those words, or he will surely die. You're not going to take a chance on your child. So she said, now when a mother is walking with their child, I walk with them and I write down the do or the don't. And now more children are living. All I said at the UN, I was like, done. Drop the mic, because like that no one could not relate with that, right? And then we showed a video too that talked about the program. But I would say, wherever we serve in the world, the people we're serving with know so much more than us. The people we're serving, um, you know, it's not that anybody's dumb or helpless or we're more powerful. I mean, that's the problem with our world right now is, we've got this idea that, power wins. No, everywhere you go, there are powerful, smart, caring, loving, involved people, and they know best about how to do what they need. And so it's maybe something that I did bring to USAID, because I don't know if you can tell, I'm not so conventional. And they kept asking me to speak, and I would come and like rat them out and say, thank you for having me, but you're still not supporting us and you're using all our data. And by the way, who has been on the ground to ask the women why a project on Tuesday at 2 o'clock has never been attended? Stop funding it, for God's sake. And so anyway, our project is now picked up. It's supported by USAID, which means nothing right now because, we're in a world of hurt right now. But some funding came from USAID. But I didn't come as I'd be like the hostile witness that they were inviting to speak. But somehow it helped. And but that is so USAID though is so needed, so powerful because you have people like me who are coming and giving you intel that you wouldn't have otherwise. You are hearing the voices of the women of South Sudan that people are making assumptions about around the world, right? Um, but also, people who are involved in programs are much more likely to tell you the truth about what's going on in those areas. And places where people are really vulnerable are also places that are vulnerable to creating terrorist cells. And so when you give people hope and you give them agency, they're more likely to cooperate with you and give you information that will help them and help the world. And so John F. Kennedy created the USAID in 1961, and it was to cut through the red tape and bureaucracy of the State Department, which wasn't doing the greatest job of getting the type of information they needed in areas where you need to be building deep relationships. And so by defunding USAID, we're making our country a lot more vulnerable and we're really hurting people around the world that are working with us. So it's a super good, the return on investment with USAID is fabulous compared to the amount of money we would spend on intel that we need to collect. So which usually separates us from other people. This is building real relationships and cooperation that promote peace. And so, that's my.
Should we show the videos?
Yeah, let's show the video.
All right.
Sorry. Blah,
Oh, it's
blah,
all
blah.
good.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm just going to take a second so I can share them as well.
And the first one, it's the one that we created on our own, just trying to introduce the program. Also, we showed it at every place we spoke. So here we go. After generations of oppression, war, and genocide, with the odds stacked against them, the South Sudanese people became independent and separated from Sudan on July 9, 2011. They're now faced with the challenge of running their own nation. With only 1 out of 10 women and only 3 out of 10 men able to read and write, it's as if South Sudan has its hands tied behind its back. Without literacy, the citizens must rely on others to create and manage the systems needed for health and stability. This has left South Sudan vulnerable to corruption, exploitation, and oppression. The Lost Boys were young children separated from their parents during the genocide. Some of these survivors grew up to create our organization, Lost Boys Rebuilding Southern Sudan, in order to protect the next generation from becoming lost to war and violence. To make their goal a reality, they recruited the help of professionals in the areas of education, law, finance, and program development. Together, in 2009, we built the Malawal Kun Community Learning Center, where anyone, regardless of age or gender, can come and learn how to read and write and speak the new official language of South Sudan, which is English. Over 400 learners attend classes here every day. The community center is also the headquarters for our Literacy at the Well program. This is where we train teachers who bring education to women and girls while they wait to fill their jerry cans with safe water for their families. Our learners walk long distances to reach the wells, then wait in long lines. This leaves little time to attend traditional classes. We have turned the waiting time into an opportunity to learn. The women and girls bring the lessons they learn home to their families and neighbors. Whole communities are beginning to read and write and speak English. This simple initiative has proven to be effective, empowering, and cost-efficient. It only costs $4,000 a year to provide a Literacy at the Well program for an entire village. This covers the teacher's training, annual salary, and supplies. In 2015, the citizens of South Sudan will choose the people who will represent them in local and national government for the very first time. This is an important first step toward democracy, but without literacy and the ability to communicate in the national language, citizens will not be equipped to fully participate in this process and in their own governance. Join Lost Boys Rebuilding Southern Sudan and help this young nation break the bonds of dependency. Your donations will equip and empower the people of South Sudan to build their own communities and develop the systems that foster true independence. With your support, South Sudan will be liberated from the shackles of illiteracy and free to begin building a healthy and peaceful nation. Thank you for your support. Please visit rebuildingsouthernsudan.org. So the next video, does anybody hear a lion?
And I started drinking warm water to help me lose weight. My friends laughed at me.
Yeah, that wouldn't be me. But I'll try it though. I'll try anything. But is anybody here a lion? Do you know about the Lions clubs? Well, this is kind of interesting. When we were realizing the program was growing faster than we could fundraise, I heard at the same time that the Lions had chose literacy as one of their 5 pillars that they wanted to improve health and safety and peace around the world. So I was just running around the world getting money. I mean, I spoke at the UN, spoke at UNESCO in Paris as one of their keynote speakers for International Literacy Day. I would go anywhere that I could get money. And so I rushed to Lions headquarters. They were having a big international meeting. I asked to get on the agenda. And the Lions were awesome. So they, because the lions are all around the world, we think of lions as us in America. No, the lions are totally different. When you're in Asia, there's very, very wealthy lions. India, one of the largest donations ever given to the lions was a young woman entrepreneur. I say young, she's my age, but she gave $5 million to the lions to improve literacy around the world. So the lions, the Belgium lions, you could wait 3 years to become a lion, and you're going to have to pay a lot of money to be a lion. And you have to wear a really lovely suit that you also have to pay for. They're beautiful. They don't wear yellow vests like us here in America. But so I went to them. I said, you want to do this? I can help you do this. And I can help you do it in a cheap way. And each club can have their own site, you know, everything. And so I was their UN speaker. And let's play that next video.
South Sudan in Africa
Here we go. Ready? Yeah.
has one of the lowest literacy rates in the world. Less than 25% of the recently established nation can read.
Wherever you have a low literacy rate, you have poor health, the highest child mortality rates, and the least stability.
Clean water and the bad water. But back to my people in South Sudan, they doesn't know which one is good. Whatever water they found, they just drink them.
But because women in this country often wait up to 3 hours at water wells to fill up their 40-gallon jugs, there was an opportunity for them to learn.
Few women and girls make it to school because there's not enough hours in the day. So we bring school to the well sites.
Literacy at the well was developed to educate villagers on the importance of clean water, but also to teach women and children how to read and write.
By providing literacy skills, you help people become more healthy and you help communities become more peaceful.
Recently, Lions in Illinois publicized and raised funds for this program.
Let's go!
They led hundreds of participants on a 2-mile walk that represented the average distance these women walked to collect clean water.
Is for egg.
E is for egg.
Everybody understand that?
As a young boy, William Mao was one of thousands of Sudan refugee children, also known as the Lost Boys, who were separated from their parents during the country's violent civil war. Now grown up, William wants to empower women and children in this new independent nation. For nearly a decade, Wendi Dwyer has worked with William and the Lost Boys rebuilding Southern Sudan. She was instrumental in rallying Lions clubs around the world to support literacy at the well.
I believe Lions Club International is that help that our learners and the people of South Sudan really need at this time.
We have lions calling us all over who want to help now, and it's just awesome.
It's hard to see your impact at an international level until you have someone like Wendi come along who makes these frequent trips to Sudan. She's helped us create this Lions Club in South Sudan.
Chartered in 2013, the Juba Host Lions Club was the first Lions Club in South Sudan. With support from lions around the world, these efforts in South Sudan will continue and grow.
We've got the best news ever. Lions Club International has granted us a grant for $75,000.
Having a school can change the life of the people. And I don't want the next generation to be suffer like the way we used to suffer. So that's our mission. So we just want to change the life of the people.
So that was just one. Every gift they gave us, they started at 5,000, and I would over report and send them pictures and thank you. Then we got 15,000, and then we got 25,000. Then we did this event pretty near the headquarters of Lions to make sure we could get people out to see it. We got 75,000. Then they had me speak at the UN, and by the time I got off the stage, the international president was from Australia at the time, said, I'd like to go to dinner with you and William tonight, and they pledged $250,000. We were able to build 2 huge community learning centers in different parts of South Sudan that help us bring WHO, the World Food Program, the Literacy Program, a program for training women for jobs that were coming up in the government in those sites. So we used the money well to make sure we had things that could be there if we couldn't be there. So that was a big part of the project. Was I never ever recruited anybody that would have to stay, the program would be dependent on somebody from outside of the country, because South Sudan is so difficult. Really only people who have grown up there are most likely to stay there. If you're in the UNAMIS, United Nations mission in South Sudan, you get, I think, 2 or 3 years towards your retirement for every year you serve in South Sudan. So it's one of the only countries. The director of United Nations, when we met with him, he said South Sudan was the only place that made Afghanistan look like they had their shit together. And I said, can we use that quote? And he's like, no. But I was like, that should be the tagline of the country. South Sudan, the only country that makes Afghanistan look like. But so anyway, long story short, USAID totally needs our support because, we got it picked up. I mean, it was tireless getting it picked up and established without their help. I wish we would have had it. But once it was up and going, they did join in, and they helped us get more partners together to cooperate. That really improved lives of people in South Sudan. The interesting thing is today, now the trouble is in Sudan to the north, the same place that carried out this genocide through South Sudan. And it's horrible. So that really be preparing for the people of Sudan. Everyone's a pawn. I mean, really, they weren't terrible people or anything with this whole thing. But that is where, and now the South Sudanese people are giving refuge to the people flooding over. So they're in the same generation of the people who carried out, genocide against their fathers, grandfathers, et cetera, and they're already giving refuge. So we're talking about really good people. So does anybody have any questions? I'm sorry I talked so long.
Wendi, I had one question. The word for the jugs that the women carry, I didn't quite understand that word, and
I don't know. It's just like slang in Northeast Africa. They're called jerry cans, but they're really just empty oil jugs.
So like Jerry, like short for Gerald or something? Or
I don't know.
Okay, nice.
That's just what they call them. They're just big plastic yellow jugs. And when you fill them up, they're 40 pounds. So
questions?
Thank you, Wendi. I just wanted to commend you for all the work you have done.
Oh, thank you.
And it's incredible. I'm a member of Zonta Club of Madison.
Oh, yeah.
And Zonta is an international service organization, which has a relationship, an NGO relationship to the United Nations. And that focus of Zonta is on improving the lives of women and children around the world. Not that our group can do that by itself, but
No, you're all part of it. Everybody, even coming right now, we are all a part of
and
improving
so
lives.
I'm
of women.
thinking ahead to next year in our programming.
Yeah.
And I'm on that committee. We're a small group and we're part of about 30,000 women around the world.
Yeah, and I know about Zonta, and Zonta is really interesting because they quickly, a long time ago, realized that when you invest in women, the money goes much
Right.
farther.
Right.
And so, like the initial programs in South Sudan were to educate men. And we saw, and the Lost Boys told me, that doesn't work because if a man can read, he has a leg up on his competitors. So he's not likely to teach another man how to read.
Right.
And he's not going to teach his wife, and he's definitely not going to teach his daughters. So we knew. So that's the same as Zonta. If you invest in
Right.
women, it goes so much farther.
Right.
So
So I'll be talking with you further about it.
yeah, that
Thank
sounds
you.
great. Nice
Thank
to
you.
meet you. Thank you so much.
Other questions? Thanks, David.
What is the population of South Sudan?
Oh, well, there's never been a consent. Anyway, you don't know. There's never even been, how it said in 2015, they'll pick their elected officials. That still hasn't happened. Okay, so that's where the coup, just mess. So not really sure. I think the estimated population is something like 13 million, but it can change at any time because right now there's a lot of people pouring down from Sudan to the north. And the South Sudanese, like all the Lost Boys, none of them had, they were all born in huts. So when they came out of the United States, one of the things I had to do with them when they need to get a driver's license or anything, they have to pick a birthday. And almost all of them picked January 1st. So I'm at the DMV with three, almost 7 foot. The South Sudanese people are also the tallest, darkest people genetically in the world. So like Manute Bowl. He actually stayed at our house and had a duck under. We were like midgets. Like we were like, no, I shouldn't use that word. We were like little people. My family's little. We are all five, like my tallest son is 5'9", and we're all smaller than that. And then we had Manute Bowl as our guest. He was the tallest player in the NBA ever. And so the poor guy, like our chairs, it looked like he was like sitting on children's chairs and stuff. And we were just like, we're so sorry. So even our couch looked too small for him. Yeah, so tallest people in the world. And so I'm at the DMV and I'm with, I don't know, Arik and Benjamin, I can't remember who else, getting their driver's license. So these super tall guys, okay, and then this little old blonde woman, these tall, really tall guys. And I'm having to take them through and the first one comes through and oh, what's your birthday? January 1st. Oh, you're a New Year's baby. The DMV woman is, oh my gosh, and then the next one comes through. You're a New Year's baby. And I'm like, before your head blows off your shoulders, he'll also be a New Year's baby. I don't want the roof to blow off this place. They all pick their birthdays. It's like, oh, So yeah, so if you meet a South Sudanese Lost Boy who will now be about in their 30s or so, that most likely their birthday will be January 1st. So there you go. But yeah, and so that makes it really difficult to know how many people are in the country, and there's no records of deaths either. So that makes it really hard. So it's hard to know, really. And for a while, people were returning to South Sudan because they were so hopeful about independence. But then quickly, it was only 3 years later that the vice president tried to kill the president in a very bloody coup. And then people were like, yeah, it's not time yet. So there was a lot of people who had returned left. So it's hard to know, really. But yeah, it's time travel. If you go, and I don't recommend anybody travel to South Sudan unless you have a purpose to travel to South Sudan, because it just causes stress on the few resources that they have when it comes to medical resources, food, water, everything. But if you do have a reason to go and you go, it is time travel. There is not a separate, just because we live with water and electricity stuff, that doesn't exist. So you will be very hot. It's like 105 during the day and 90 something at night. If you get bit by a snake, the only way to save you is to immediately cut off that where you were bit. You know, it's not like you're going to get to a hospital and get you just die. So that was when I would see someone with that, I would think, oh my gosh, I hope that does. That would be a bad way to go home, you know. So that was, and then as it turned out, while I was doing this, it turned out I was already legally blind. I didn't know. I thought I needed to settle down, figure out my eyes, and get a better prescription, but it turned out I was diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa. And by the time I was diagnosed, I was already legally blind and told I couldn't drive home from the appointment. So I've been going steadily more blind in the last 15 years. So I would probably never go back to South Sudan because you really need all your senses to not step on a snake or fall in an open well or fire. There's little, yeah, or human waste, which is there's no toilets. So, but I just know now I could not I wouldn't be very safe there. And then also I kind of got to be known in that area, and people would say, oh, I saw her in the market. You know, it'd be like word would spread that you were back in the country. And that's good when you're trying to help people. It's not good when there's nefarious things. So right now I don't think it would be very safe. I don't know. So that is does anybody have any more questions?
Wendy, did you want to talk about your photos?
Oh, really quick. Okay, this is this is my favorite of our sites. This one was so awesome because it just started like the rest of them, and it was just a well and an instructor, and the women were so organized that they got people to come at different times of day depending on how they were learning. And this is really funny. We were thinking, how are we going to set people up in programs without hurting anyone's feelings? Turns out that's a very Western way of thinking. These women were like, yeah, you come at 2. No, not 2, but like you come get your water in the morning because you're not learning as well. There was no like sweet talk about anything. And so the smarty pants came in the afternoon, and probably whatever they called the other group, who knows, were in the morning. But then some of our learners, they also worked together to build, this is the coolest thing, like they did their church, which was putting big logs into the ground when the ground's wet, and then looks like a tiki hut almost, if you could imagine, like a big open pavilion. They built their own for the Literacy at the Well program so that during the rainy season they could continue learning. Isn't that awesome? Without coming back to us and saying we need money for, like that shows it's a healthy program when people problem solve. And then some of these learners on their own, without getting paid or asked or anything, went and started Literacy at the Well programs in their sisters' areas. So left their area, went to where their sisters were living, and started teaching. So this is my most favorite one. You can find me pretty easily in this picture. And then this is a great picture. We had a young man named David live with us. He was one of the Lost Boys, and he was working at an amusement park near Minneapolis and got his foot run over on the ride. And of course, the employer thought, oh, what's he going to do? He's a refugee. Well, he didn't know that David was part of our family, and my ex-husband's an attorney, and I made him very much help David get the medical care that he needed. And so David lived with us while he was getting surgery on his foot and getting it paid for by his employer, which is all he asked for, was that he wouldn't end up with a bill he could never pay. And so I had pictures of David recuperating with my dog laying on him and my kids by him on a big couch. And I was in this village, and someone said, oh, this is David's cousin. This is David's. And I was like, wait, I've got pictures of David. So I opened up my phone. I thought they were going to explode. They could not believe that their relative was in my house with my dog on him, like that. And so we all immediately became family to his family. And then this is like that would be David's house in South Sudan. Do you see that a hut in the background? Um, and so it just shows you how quickly a world can become small, you know, just by something like that. So isn't that funny? And the cool thing was William Mao, who I just adore, he saw this and just snapped it. And we got home and I saw this and I'm like, this is Norman Rockwell stuff, you know, isn't it? Look at his family, so excited to see him on the camera. So that's that.
So you might not be the right person to ask this, but USAID is being defunded, closed, have you heard of any kinds of plans or movements to fund the kinds of things that they were doing around the world?
You know, mostly it would probably be each program would have someone as passionate as me rushing out trying to get money. I do think organizations, you know, like the Lions will be filling in some things. We have philanthropists who are involved, you know, in malaria and, you know, we have people who are, it won't fill up those same gaps in the same way. So I think like whatever anybody's really passionate about, maybe do some research about what's most effective wherever you're really passionate, and then see if there's anything you can do to help. It's just terrible. I mean, yeah, but that's a really good question. But no, we don't have another. Well, we could have China. China could totally just pick it all up, and we've complained about that forever in the United States about the China Safari, it's called, where China does all the infrastructure in Kenya and Lagos and all over. And, you know, that doesn't come with nothing. That comes with a dependence on China, right? So yeah, that's a really good question, because I've been thinking that, you know, as soon as this happened, I was like, that's a cheap, great investment. If I was China, I would buy it to like Monopoly. I would buy USAID immediately. It would create so much dependence and bad will towards the United States, you know, everything. So yeah, this is just dumb. You know, there's no getting around it. This is such a bad investment for us. So yeah.
Just picking up on what you just said, I don't know if this is a question or a topic.
Yeah.
But, Africa is a part of the world that is, in my perception, rarely featured in the news.
Yeah.
And even short news stories, even when there were really significant elements going on in the Civil War and all that. So my question is, yes, we need advocacy, but don't we need better coverage first? And we're having problems right now because the news cycle is being dominated by what's coming out of Washington and Florida, not only in terms of amount, but in terms of forcefulness.
Yeah.
That I just wonder if you wanted to speak to the challenges, because I've been aware of the challenges of Sudan, but even when I look for something in the news, it's just not there. And I'm just wondering,
yeah.
what
Oh no,
your comment about that?
100%. If you can listen to BBC World News every day, that's my number one recommendation. I used to say Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera News used to be phenomenal for just world news. You know, we think of it as, I don't know, whatever, Middle East, but it's not. It's world news. The Economist, if you get The Economist, their world news is really good. It's just that, you know, it's in print and everything happens so quickly. But I would say, you know, but you're right. And the reason we don't hear about it is because, you know, our news in the United States is based on economy. And so news stations report on what people will watch and what they can sell advertising for. So yeah, like really support your you know, listen with great intent and the funny thing is, world news, like we live in the world, and it's so funny, you're right, how little world news we get, right? Everything's so local um, but yeah, that's really true. Yeah.
Because of the generosity of my brother-in-law, I get to read the National Geographic every month.
Yeah.
I was critical of the National Geographic for a long time, but it's really good now.
Yeah.
Terrific. Anything coming up on the National Geographic about what you've been seeing? Because that parallels a lot of what I've been reading. But
Yeah.
about that.
Oh, I'm sure they'll be all over it. And they have a pretty good, they have regular on cable TV. They have TV shows that are National Geographic. And so, yeah, I do. I think National Geographic my kids grew up on it, and you just don't know what someone's going to read while they're in the bathroom. My one son is an epidemiologist, and he speaks fluent Swahili, and he has been used to collect data in the first language by Mayo Clinic and WHO, and that came probably from having refugees live in our house, but also National Geographic. He read about people doing what he does now. And so I think you just never know what's going to take. You could throw it out all out. I have another son's a skateboarder, that he never probably picked up that magazine in his life, So, but you just don't know. You just throw it out there.
Speaking of the economy, what are the economies of Sudan and South Sudan based on other than oil?
Oh my gosh, that's the best question because this is really funny. So it's still, I would say, the only thing you could really count on is still your cattle, because they do have a currency, and every bill, I should have brought that in because it's really cool. Every bill has John Garang on it. John Garang is the hero of South Sudan. He's the reason the peace came, and he was killed in a plane orchestrated plane accident, but he's the only person on all the currency. And when we were there, this was pretty long ago, because I guess now maybe more people have seen their own currency. But the funny thing was, most people had never seen their currency. And the currency is, like you really don't want to switch for our program, we never put our money into the South Sudanese currency. We left it in US dollars till it was distributed, because there could be be devalued, and then to get money, they have money changers in the market. And so you have these little kids that because they got to get some education, right? And maybe their parents didn't. So you have these little kids like counting out the money, and then you have a huge stack like this, and it'll be $20. So we have a picture of all our money on a cot in a hut, getting ready to distribute it to some of our teachers. And it looks like we're drug dealers, because in this little hut, there's just piles of all this money. And it is absolutely ridiculous. So yeah, it's really difficult. Most people would still much rather have US currency, than anything in South Sudan. And the money's very pretty, but I don't, so that's a good question. Okay. Oh, thank you so much for listening. Sorry, I'm so long-winded.
I have a question about the language and also religion.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that Arabic was spoken and now it's English.
Yeah.
And are they able to hold on to some of their Arabic, that's from their cultural beginning?
This is a really good question, because I spoke at UNESCO in Paris, International Literacy Day, and these are the smartest people in the world having to do with literacy programs around the world. And some people got up and they were like attacking me, and I'm like, and I'm me, so I don't really take anything to heart. So I just go, oh, okay. So which one of the 300 languages did you want us to pick? And then when they go to vote in English, did you want them to learn Arabic to then learn English? Because really most of the people didn't speak Arabic. So out of South Sudan is very regional. So wherever your tribe is, you speak that language, which also made it hard to develop, because you can imagine, and also to share things like laws or anything, because you all agreed in your language here, right? And now the next village over there kind of agreed in their language. So yeah, over 300 languages were spoken in South Sudan. And most now, all these years later, most people in international development believe that, to get people onto one language at some point, you could still speak your mother tongue. Nobody's ever going to stop speaking in their mother tongue, I'll tell you that. But most of those languages aren't literate, so they're not languages that have ever been written. So now you're given a document, right? And if you don't have any concept of phonemes or English or anything, it's such a great way to rip people off, So so I was attacked at that, and I was just like, okay, have you been to South Sudan, people? So these were like heads of universities in Munich and stuff. And I was like, whatever, like we have people at Wells for $4,000 just trying to get traffickers out of women's lives, So, but I was like, yeah, then come on board. Smarty pants, get over here, you come. But yeah, it is hard. And it is really, and then Swahili, when people would get to the refugee camps, that's why Swahili is spoken so much in Northeast Africa, because it's a little bit of a lot of tribal languages, very little bit, but Arabic, French, English, a melange of like all these things, and it's really easy to learn Swahili. So that's so we did think about that. We were like, do we get people to speak Swahili because it'd be quicker than English? But then really we knew their country was adamant at becoming an English-speaking country, so we'd just be causing more chaos if we didn't go with that. But yeah, it's really hard, but when people want to learn, they learn. I mean, it's surprising how quickly our learners learned. That's, as hard as it would be for me to learn their language. I don't know. It was surprising. So, but thank you for asking.
Thank you for that explanation. And then the religion too?
Oh, so South Sudan is still considered a Christian country, and but it is different where it's mixed with. So South Sudan, that was why the North Sudanese could carry out the genocide, trying to say they were trying to convert people to Islam, but they really weren't. They didn't ever give anybody a chance to convert. They were just there to kill people, clear out the land for the oil. It wasn't like, oh, if you converted, you could be on our side. No, that wasn't ever going to happen. It was ethnic cleansing completely. But the South Sudanese are mostly, Christian, but it's also mixed with, kind of indigenous beliefs also. And then it was the Catholic, kind of really tough missionaries from Italy. You should see these guys. They came down from Italy, not knowing if they'd be killed, and they just set up, they set up posts and wouldn't leave. And it took generations, but eventually people started interacting with Italian missionaries. So there's still Italian posts there. And so it's kind of interesting. So a lot of names like Michelangelo and Archangelo, like of South Sudanese people taking their Christian name, and I'm like, that's not your name, but so but a lot of the Lost Boys who live with us, they had their name like Arik, and then their Christian given name would be like Michelangelo, but they're mostly Italian names still. So that's how Christianity came. But really quickly, I just want to tell you this one story because it's most beautiful. Benjamin, who lived with us, he had would go to church with us, and he said he thought all the stories, because they didn't know how to read or write, all the stories were passed down orally and then in their village, right? And so when he heard stories about Abraham and Sarah or all these, he thought they were his ancestors, only his family's ancestors. And it wasn't until they got to a refugee camp and they were at a church service at a refugee camp, and he said, I'm related to all these people, and some of them were white. So he didn't know that was it was just stories passed down. Isn't that beautiful? And and then when he said that, I'm like, oh, that is our family. Like, we are related. So that's so cool. But I love that's how the truth, that we all have this. So, but I think it's neat.
It's going to be church time soon. So thank you so much. This was really great.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks.
If you have any questions, you can always come find me. I'll either have a white cane or a guide dog with me.